talk mainly about staff, but that's not your day job. So would you mind kind of telling us what you do normally?
Well, so I am a learning design specialist at the Center for New Designs for Learning and Scholarship, also known as CANDLES. If you look the acronym, we pronounce it CANDLES, at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I've been in a faculty development role slash academic technology role for a little over 5 years now. And previous to that, I was a contingent faculty member at a rural public state comprehensive institution. My day-to-day job currently is I do traditional faculty development, which is helping faculty, with their pedagogy and teaching strategies. I also work in the academic technology sphere, so integrating technology into their teaching, digital pedagogy, digital assignments, those kinds of things. And also was doing some instructional design for online learning. And then the pandemic happened, and now everything is all remote online learning all the time, and education technology all the time. So it's been really interesting. It's been really challenging. I joked in one of the pieces that I wrote that we all kind of chuckled to ourselves early on in the pandemic. Those of us who work in our fields, that we didn't get into this to be essential services, but it just turned out that we became essential services. And so I've been interested even before I moved into staff, around affect and emotions, particularly around teaching. And so it started thinking about that and working on that. And then when I moved into a staff role, um, shifted my thinking through my experience and thinking around, all right, well, what does this mean for staff, right? What are these questions that we're examining? What does it mean for staff? And, found that outside of librarians, that not a lot of people had been doing that kind of work and thinking about emotional labor and the emotional labor that is asked of us in various staff roles, student facing staff roles, faculty facing staff roles, public facing staff roles.
And in your articles, I mean, because at least in my mind, at least at our institution, when you say staff, I have a very clear idea of what it is. But you kind of made me realize that there are different types of staff. So, kind of in general, what do you when you talk about staff, who are you referring to?
I guess it depends on the audience, right? I try to be as inclusive as possible when I talk about staff. And so anybody who is not on the tenure track, or in a kind of instructional position, I don't want to forget my adjunct colleagues and compatriots on that side of it, because that's a whole other level of affective and emotional labor that they perform. Um, but basically, the middle management of higher education, right? The people who, and I would go to be so inclusive as to say, I also mean the hourly staff, not just the wage staff, but also the hourly staff. I mean, we are all a part of making the university run and making the university work and helping our students be successful. Um, from making sure that they are served food, and that they have, especially under COVID, sanitary and safe conditions in which to learn, all the way to student services, to the bursar's office, to the people who run the tutoring center. So I try to be as inclusive as possible, because I really think we don't look at higher education and academia holistically enough. We think of faculty, we think of administrators, but at the end of the day, staff, writ large, make up the majority of people working in higher education. And so we need to start thinking more about how we treat staff, how staff is integrated into the academic and university or institutional, that's the word I'm looking for, institutional community, and how important we are, and I think that those are conversations that needed to happen a while ago, that were starting to happen, and I now think hopefully have been accelerated given the importance of staff under COVID-19.
And you point out, and it was an aha moment when I was reading your article, that from a diversity standpoint, staff is usually where you see a broader diversity in people.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And, I was particularly struck. I wrote about this in a different article around solidarity between staff and um, contingent faculty. And what was really striking was the Cal State custodial and other hourly employees went on strike. And if you look at the picket lines, and looked at pictures of the picket lines looked more like the students who go to Cal State than the faculty, right? And so that was a moment that really struck me as well. And I actually worked at Cal State San Bernardino way back in the day. Um, and, it was striking to me. It's kind of an outsider to even Southern California at that point, and as a Canadian, to come in and see, the diversity of the student population, but then the still whiteness of the faculty, right? And the diversity of faces that I saw were the administrative assistants in the office. They were, when I would go for the student services, when I would go elsewhere on campus, but it wasn't in front of the classroom.
Yeah. Like I said, it was not something that kind of dawned on me until I actually read it. So it is fair to say that COVID-19 has been difficult upon all of us, but kind of specifically, what are some of the issues that staff has faced with COVID-19, particularly in contrast to maybe some of the faculty issues?
So I think one of the difficult factors that adds to everything, because you kind of it's one rope, and you kind of got to tease out all of the different pieces of it. But on the one hand, again, it depends on if you're faculty facing or student facing. There are different sorts of issues. I think a really great example of the student facing is the Chronicle of Higher Education did a piece called Team No Sleep. They call us Team No Sleep. And it was all about student service professionals and the kinds of stress. And they didn't say emotional or affective labor, but when you read through it and you know what it is, that's exactly what they're doing, right? They're on call 24/7. They are, counseling these students. They are supporting these students. They are trying to connect with these students. They are, invested in the student success, and on a much more intimate level, aware of the difficulties that students are facing, right? In a way that typically faculty don't always see, right? So student facing staff are really dealing with that kind of intimacy with the students that, yes, they typically have, but it's, been turned up to 11, to use the expression, right? It's gone up exponentially. On the faculty facing side, there's a real challenge in that um, faculty are there for students, right? And faculty are kind of holding it together for the students, so to speak. But then we are holding it together for the faculty. Does that make sense? And so, like, the faculty come to us with their frustrations, with their anxieties, with their uncertainties, with with all of their baggage on how they feel and what they think about online and remote learning and academic technology and what pedagogy is. One of the things I say about like faculty development centers, and you could say the same thing depending on how your institution is set up with, is it the instructional design office, is it the e-learning office, like, all of these sort of faculty facing services on campus. I say we serve the whole campus, but we know that we don't actually serve the whole campus. We serve the part of the campus that willingly comes to us, which typically is a very low percentage, right? Like, that's the whole impetus behind it, right? And a huge tenet of faculty development, right? Like, we don't want to force this on anyone, right? We want people to come to us. We want to be open to those things. Again, depending on your institutional policy around online learning, in a lot of cases, it's also faculty who want to teach online, go see the instructional designers. again, some institutions people are forced to or coerced to, but that's, typically we see the people who want to be there, right? And typically we see them in a very manageable sort of way, right? And so we're staffed that way, right? We're staffed for 10% of the faculty, 15% of the faculty to come and, you know, uh, come and use our services, for lack of a better term at the moment. And what COVID-19 did is it completely shifted that. Suddenly, faculty had to come and see us, right? Whether they were told that they had to, or they just felt they had to because they had to do this remote learning thing. I mean, we had, gosh, it was something like, I think at the end of the day, it was something like 90% of faculty had contact with our center, either through our workshops, either through one of our presentations, or the course design institutes we ran over the summer, right? So a unit that was built for a small percentage of campus who were willing participants suddenly became an epicenter for everyone, literally everyone on campus, to come to for help in various degrees of readiness and willingness, right? And so now you are, as a faculty developer or instructional designer, having to deal with all of these really complex emotions that faculty are bringing to the table, and having to navigate that with the goal of hopefully helping them create the best learning environment for their students, right? And so it's so that's all of that navigation, and we're on the sidelines dealing with all the same things everybody else is dealing with when it comes to the pandemic, right? We're dealing with our budgetary uncertainty, right? Particularly staff are hit hard. It's hard to get hard. It's not as hard as it used to be, but it's hard to get rid of tenured positions. It's not so hard to get rid of staff positions, depending on your union situation and your institution, but like it's easier. All of our budgets have been slashed. We're short staffed. We're also trying to homeschool our kids and deal with sick family members and all of that kind of stuff. And we are also, having to hold it together and keep on a brave face and a confident face for faculty who are looking to us to provide guidance and support for them. So it's a lot of relationship negotiation, also in a short compressed time period, because suddenly we're doing this for everyone on campus. We don't have the time that we would usually have to invest in a relationship with the faculty member to get them to trust us, to get them to try things, to get them to feel comfortable with us, to feel comfortable with the technology, the pedagogy. It's like, no, you got me for 3 days and we got to try to build something in 3 days, because in next week I got another group coming in, because that's how we have to do this. And so you sort of, we had a whole summer of like every week it was a new cycle of people come in. And so like you had the sort of rotation of it, where whole new group of people, maybe some of them, maybe you don't. You have to build a relationship with them. And then hope that by Thursday they feel confident enough to go forward and start designing their course. And then you start all over again on Monday. And that's usually, those are kinds of things we do over 8 months, right? Like we do have a summer online program where we work with faculty for 8 months, right? Once or twice a month, a couple hours a meeting, all that kind of stuff. And so suddenly it's been compressed into 3 days because we had to. And that's really, it's really difficult affective work, because you've got to maintain your patience, you've got to maintain your cool, you've got to maintain your sense of ease and confidence. There's also maneuvering the faculty staff dynamic. Higher education is extraordinarily hierarchical. And so, different faculty view that hierarchy and treat that hierarchy in different ways. And so you very quickly have to figure out what kind of faculty it is. And so what you can do as a staff member with this faculty, that and quickly, right? Like you don't have time to repair the relationship. If it doesn't work on Monday, that's it. That's your chance. You may have lost that faculty member. That's a lot. So it's really, there's lots of different layers to it. And again, if you had somebody who worked in student services, I'm sure they could go into very much more detail about how their work has shifted as well in
Right.
terms of the affective labor, but like certainly faculty facing roles, those have been the challenges.
So when you refer to affective labor, I mean, what are you referring, or what do you mean by it?
So affective labor is basically you managing your own emotions in order to evoke an emotional reaction from the person you're working with. And so the book of Managed Heart, Arlie Hochschild, did I get that right? She actually coined the term emotional labor, and then it's evolved into affective labor. But she studied flight attendants, and so it was very much in the service industry, and how flight attendants had to maintain a sense of calm and poise and all that kind of stuff, and in terms of like security risks and all those and emergencies and the kind of training they go through. And so it's really about maintaining your own emotions in order to evoke an emotion in the person you're working with, or for, right? And that comes through an awful lot in in these staff roles in higher education, right? Like we have to maintain a certain level of affect and emotion in order to evoke an emotion in the student or faculty we're working with, right? I have to display an air of calm and knowledgeability, but not too much of that because that might offend a faculty member. um I have to appear happy to serve, right? I have to, so there's different layers depending on the interaction. Again, let's think of the example of the faculty member who very rigidly views the hierarchy um of academia, and clearly sees that staff are beneath them, right? So that kind of maintenance that you have to do. And I asked this question about, how do you work with faculty who actively, um, you know, uh, hate is too strong a word, but I'll use it. Like, how do you work with faculty who actively hate you or resent you or dismiss you or disrespect you? Right. That's and that is affective labor, to be able to know all of this stuff and still sit there and work to have a productive relationship and a productive interaction with that faculty member
Okay, okay.
or administrator or whoever else.
So do you think that the relationship between faculty and staff post-COVID, as we start to get out of our pandemic, do you think it's forever been changed, or are we kind of still in that mode? And
I hope so. I really hope so. I think that faculty are appreciating more and more the work that staff do behind the scenes, invisible to them before, because faculty would go to their offices and then they'd go to the classroom and then go back to their offices, and they saw students in office hours in their classroom and then very little else. It's becoming increasingly obvious for faculty members, I think, how much work is going on behind the scenes to support the students, especially because it's not there anymore, right? Or at least not in person in the way that we're used to it. Um, I think that, I think faculty have changed a lot of faculty, maybe not every faculty, and it depends on who you talk to, because I have some friends who are very cynical about this, but I think that they've changed their pedagogies, which I think makes a huge difference in terms of those relationships moving forward. If they can think less hierarchically about their pedagogy, then I think that opens the door for thinking less hierarchically about a lot of different things in higher education. I think a lot of faculty have seen the treatment of particularly hourly staff and been rightfully disgusted by it in a lot of cases, people forcing people to come back to work, forcing people to work in unsanitary and unsafe conditions. That this has gotten coverage, and they're actually looking at these things, right? Um, I think it'll depend on I think like most things in the US higher education system, it'll depend on the institution, right? Um, I think at our institution, I think it'll change for the better. I think it'll be really, really productive moving forward. I think it always had been, but again, um, it's the exposure, right? It's faculty seeing us for the first time in a lot of cases. Like we were kind of there, right? But like they, that was just the thing. They didn't need the thing, and now they need the thing, and they've seen the thing, and they're like, huh, kind of like the thing. Thing's not bad. So, I think it's also really difficult though post pandemic because the structures aren't set up for faculty staff collaborations, right? Our reward structures for faculty and for staff don't facilitate it, right? Where on a tenure dossier is a faculty staff collaboration going to fit? Service, research, teaching. And I'm lucky working in a teaching and learning center. Yes, you could probably fit it under teaching, but they have to sit there and think about it. So where's the motivation for faculty to come to staff to work together on something, right? They're going to do what counts. um and same with staff, right? um we're used to depending on the culture of the institution. I mean, a lot of the times a staff role is not a partnership with a faculty or a collaboration, it's you're working for them, right? And then it becomes, well, the difficult, again, power dynamic comes up, whereas faculty are feel like often they're the boss and can what they say can go, because that's typically how faculty do things. Whereas I'm not answerable ultimately to the faculty member, I'm answerable to my supervisor, right? And so you can really put staff in an awkward position if those clear lines aren't if those lines aren't made explicitly clear around what's the reporting, who's responsible for what, who's answerable to what. And it just turns out that you could get put in a very uncomfortable position in that way. So I think there'll be a desire to, but the structures that are in place don't facilitate or encourage those kinds of collaborations. So I think that if we're interested in them, there has to be first a collaboration to change structures.
And one of the things, and in your writings, you make several suggestions. One is would be staff councils, as well as a staff level position right below the president or within the president's. I don't know what the official term would be. I would call it a
Yeah.
cabinet. So I actually did look up our staff council at OSU, and I got on their mailing list. But really, what should I expect from them, and what should I help them with, and how should I approach them? I mean, what can I do as an individual to kind of move the conversation forward?
Well, I think again, it's get to know the institutional culture, right? Get to know good, sign up for the mailing list. Usually their meetings are open, attend a couple of the meetings. Easier than ever to just kind of sit there and answer email while they're on Zoom listening to the meetings. See what their priorities are, see what the agenda is, you know, and see where the spaces are. Like, what are they concerned about? Is this what they should be concerned about? If you are, they represent you, but if they don't hear from you, they don't know how to represent you, right? And so, bring things up with your representative. Who is your representative? If you're interested, run to be a representative. What does that mean? What does that entail? What sorts of input is there for you in terms of policy? Sometimes it's really narrow, right? And so you have to find an advocate on the faculty side, right, who can also work to help make these go forward. Sometimes you do have a bigger audience with the president or the provost. And so in that case, one of the things that our staff council is really trying to do was advocate for the Christmas break, like, or the holiday break, right? To give an example. The university, because we have a hospital, doesn't just shut down for 2 weeks the way some institutions do, right? They just shut down for 2 weeks over the holidays. No one comes in, they just shut everything down. We don't shut everything down. But they were like, but no, we're extending the break and we're not going to have classes and all that kind of stuff. And it was going to be that possibly we were going to work right up until the 24th, right? Even though there's literally no faculty or students anywhere. And so they were really big on advocating and said, could you just give us some paid days off. Like just gift us some days, paid days off, because like, especially because they got rid of, again, they got rid of the holidays during the semester to try and compact everything and to keep transmissions down. And even though no one ended up coming back to campus, anyways, we lost all our holidays over the fall anyway. So it's thinking about what are the mechanisms, what are the strategies, what are the ways that we can change things for better for the staff given the constraints. And then once you know and understand the constraints, what are the collaborations that we can do in order to either remove the constraints or get around the constraints, right? And so it's kind of learning the governance, learning the culture of the institution and the governance, seeing what kind of leadership has been there in the past, what's been accomplished in the past. Go back and read former meeting minutes, right? As riveting as I'm sure that would be. But like, but you know, unless you know what's been going on and what they've been doing, it's hard to know how to what's even possible when it comes to change, right? Maybe they've only ever been able to do what it is that they've done. Well, if that's the case, then how do we work around that?
And one of the things that you write about is that, and particularly at your level, but even with us communicators, that oftentimes there's the same expectation in 24-hour on-call duty with staff as similar to what faculty has.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's again what there's that tension, right? Where and again, it depends on your staff position, because I would say student services already expect to be on call 24/7 for their students, and that's sort of baked into their job role, right? Like when you agree to work in student services, you're agreeing to a certain flexibility in terms of hours, but you also usually have your schedule set up that way, right? You have early morning people working, you have mid-afternoon shift, you have late, you sort of work that in, and there's that expectation. Whereas often other staff, particularly faculty facing staff, you know, um, it's kind of like, oh, well, you get to work 9 to 5 and then be done with it. And then you're like, yeah, exactly. But no, but we still expect to be on call 24/7, like you said, by faculty. So like if faculty, that we could set it was so funny. We could set our watches by it. In one of my previous jobs, like it'd be Friday and we'd have nothing all day, nothing, no one to come by, nothing's going on. We're getting ready to start the weekend. And at 4:30, the phone would ring and the emails would start coming in asking for help with the LMS, because that's when faculty got back around to it again. And so we like drew straws every week. So who's the person who's going to stay till 6 o'clock, 6:30 today to help faculty with this when they email you on weekends, because that's when they're working on it. And the exam is supposed to be on Monday, or the quiz is, on Monday, or the assignment is due and something broke. And, there's that idea of staff being 9 to 5. And you know, that's why we make less money and the faculty make more money. When at the end of the day, we are still expected to keep the same hours as faculty, waiting for them to need us, which is, it's a little demeaning, is really disrespectful. And again, it varies from place to place in terms of what kind of culture there is, what kind of tone is set by the institution, by the leadership, even the leadership within a unit, for those kinds of things. So, but it is a challenge, right? Where on the one hand, you're told, well, you're just staff and you work 9 to 5. Oh, but by the way, you also kind of have to be like faculty to be there for faculty whenever they need you.
Yeah, and particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember that was an ongoing conversation because everyone was remote working, and the blur between work and home life was just non-existent. And we had a lot of conversations of when you put the phone down, when you walk away, and when you need to be there. I think Becky had a quick question or a question.
Yeah, related to that, do you have problems within your own unit of exempt versus non-exempt staff? Because in my ag communication department that I oversaw for several years, even within the department, we had some people who were exempt and some who were non-exempt from overtime rules. And so some people were expected to answer on the weekend where others could truly turn it off. So did that cause any problems for you just among staff too?
In the past, yes. In my current position, no. We're all, I think it's like, we're all considered academic staff, I
Mm.
think, or something. There's some umbrella that all of us fall under. The only
Mhm.
exception to that would be our GAs. So we have students, they're hourly, but they're, I'm pretty sure, the only ones. But in my previous, yeah, that caused a lot of tension. But the flip side of that too was I was exempt, right, at the other job, and then we had colleagues who were non-exempt. But even as an office, like an office manager, well, events are in the evening sometimes. And you know, some days you have to be there for the graduate students, you know, whatever, or the, you know, the interview candidate who comes in, or that, you know, that it's academia runs on all of these, and they had to clock in and clock out every day. And if you did not clock in by 9 o'clock and clock out by 5 o'clock, your file was flagged. And you couldn't clock in. They put geolocating on the app. So you couldn't even clock in unless you were geolocated on campus. And yeah, and I mean, it was just, you know, so again, like even sometimes the exempt versus non-exempt, where they're like, yeah, okay, well, you know, I'm not going to work on the weekend because I'm non-exempt. But then in the same way, they were treated like they were stealing time, right? Essentially, like they could not be trusted to do their jobs, that they needed to clock in and clock out. I've worked with other staff in other positions where they literally had to account for every single 15-minute increment of their day. You know, like it, and there, and again, there is that disconnect between, you know, like faculty work when they work and they can do, you know, when, and they don't even ever have to really be on campus, right? Like, and then it's staff where certain times it's like, no, you have to be at your desk from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You have to clock in on every single 15 minutes of your day. You have to, so there's this, you know, there's this intense trust of faculty, which is, you know, I was faculty, I loved it. But then not extending that same trust to the staff, right? And just being a lot of cases really draconian. So I'm glad you brought that up, because there, you're right, is that difference between exempt and non-exempt, and it can cut both ways, right? It really does cut both ways. Particularly under the Fair Pay Act. Was that what it was called? The Fair Pay, or where yeah, the wage theft and all of that. And so they were, the institution um uh the institution framed it as that they were doing this for, and this is also so paternalistic, but the institution, yes, the Fair Labor Standards Act, thank you. The institution said, we're doing this for your protection, to make sure we're not stealing wages from you. Right. And it's like, so it was awful. It was just terrible. And it just completely destroyed the morale of the exempt staff. It really did.
At our university, for a while, you know, we into video production. So of course we have to travel across the state. And when we come back, and then if a non-exempt hit their time, their 40 hours, according to university policy, and I believe it's changed since then, they were supposed to, they couldn't drive a car, they couldn't drive the vehicle back if they were in the middle of it. They had to sit in the, I think, the back seat, and I do believe, or at least not the driver's seat, and not do any work thing, but ride in the vehicle. So I believe later it was determined that perhaps we could pay them comp wages on the way
Yeah.
back. So
And I think that, like, so this is less about, so this is the kind of emotional labor that is about making sure that you appear a certain way to your employer, right? Where I have to regulate my emotions and pretend that this doesn't suck. and that this isn't demeaning, and that it isn't, soul sucking, right? To be treated this way. You should just be grateful you have a job. We had a university president tell us that you should all just be grateful you have jobs. And you have to sit there and smile and say, yes, of course I'm grateful, right? And so that sort of regulation, it's taxing, right? It's really difficult under these kinds of circumstances to maintain service with a smile when you are being clearly treated poorly by your employer. Which is again comes back around to why there's a lot of being written about this for the service industry, right? Because they are typically treated like garbage by their employer, but have to treat the customers as always being right, and those kinds of things. But and we don't, and this is why these conversations are also difficult in higher education, is because we don't want to think about what we do as labor, even on, and like that. And again, it's the hierarchy, right? They do labor, I do work, right? They set difference between exempt and non-exempt, right? And so even as, say, academic staff, we don't like talking about it like labor, right? That's for other people labor, we work. And that's to our detriment, right? This is how we continue on, because we avoid having these conversations. We avoid confronting these realities. There's also that working in higher education is noble work, right? That there is something to be said about our institutional loyalty, right? Our loyalty to our students, so the best is tangentially related, but like my students, when I taught writing, would always feel so bad about asking a librarian for help. I don't want to bother them. And I'm like, they're a librarian at a university. This is literally their job, right? And like, they wouldn't have become a librarian at a university if they didn't want to help students. Like, this is literally their job description. But again, it's this idea of, we choose to work in higher education in a lot of cases. We continue choosing to work in higher education when we could possibly work elsewhere, because we enjoy the work that we're doing, because we enjoy working with students, we enjoy the intellectual community, we enjoy aspects of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we also do not work under difficult conditions, that we labor under difficult conditions, that administration takes advantage of that loyalty that we have to the institution. And so servicing all of this stuff, be it emotional or affective labor or imbalances between different staff and faculty and staff, surfacing all of this stuff just advances the conversation around labor conditions, and fairness and equity. And I think that those are really important conversations that higher education likes to say they're having, but like, they're really not when it comes to their staff.
Great. Jason has a question.
Yeah, I want to go back to a couple of things that you talked about with regard to this emotional labor and the management of that and things. And we did get into an area where it's definitely not good practice with respect to, demeaning of levels within the institutional hierarchy and those things. And we can talk about, that in its own column. But when we go back to where you were discussing these types of staff positions that are, student facing or faculty facing, and I kind of view them like in this emotional sandwich sort of thing of, I've got to deal with my emotions all at the same time while I'm also sort of taking on the emotions of those I'm working with, whether if it's the student that is short of funds to be able to buy food this week, or is having a relationship struggle, an emotional situation at home, or it's that faculty member that's like had their world completely turned upside down because they've never used Zoom before in their life, and now all of a sudden everything has to, so they're taking this on. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you've seen, or what advice, recommendations, coping mechanisms for those staff that are in that position, but also what those individuals that manage or supervise staff in those positions can also do to help from a workplace management, a balance, employee wellness, type of approach to be able to help those student and faculty facing staff that are really in that heavy emotional labor situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things, right? And I think it does start at the top. I think that whoever is managing them sets the tone, right? In terms of telling people, and not just telling people, but doing it themselves, taking breaks, creating, and it's a malign term, but I can use it ever, creating safe spaces to share and support one another. Validating, even just the act of validating and naming it and saying, I know this is hard work, right? I think that has been the biggest reaction and it wasn't surprising because I had the same aha moment, but even just being able to name what it is that you're doing and why it's so hard, right? When I published these pieces, people are like, that's what it is. You got it. And now I have something, a word, affective labor, that I can use to describe why this is so exhausting, or so much more exhausting than it was before. So even just acknowledging it can make a difference, where and a lot of times, again, if I don't need to mask or to manage my emotions around you, my supervisor, then that's one less stress. Does that make sense? And not saying that people should
makes
be
a lot of sense.
yeah, I'm not saying people should be unprofessional, not saying that people should go and yell at their supervisors, but like, if there is a space and a comfort level where you have, that you are someone that they can come to trust, and to be able to, unload a little bit, um, then, that helps. Right. And hopefully you have somebody that you can unload on. I mean, it's a never ending cycle of who's unloading on whom. Right. But there is something to be said about, even talking openly as a supervisor about the struggles you're having, that sets the tone. Because you can tell your employees, or whoever you're supervising, all you want, take breaks, talk about these things. But if you're not doing it yourself, they're going to be like, well, they're not doing it, so obviously I can't do this either, right? Because I've got to work as hard as the boss does. So I think you really set the tone, and I think that um, you know, creating those spaces, making sure those spaces exist, finding if there is a gap. I know money is short, but like, we're not trained in this. None of us are. Some of us are better than others, but like, like anything, it's a skill that we need to practice, and we need to learn, and we need to improve. you know, Find the people who can do a workshop to help you with this and get through strategies, either on your own campus or bringing somebody in. Um, we're really lucky again at Candles, because we're such an integrated center, that we have a whole program that we work with faculty in incorporating wellness into their classes. And so we already have in-house expertise where we do these workshops even just for ourselves, for professional development. So, find the places on campus, bring the campus. We've brought in for our big faculty development. We've brought people in from the Interfaith Chapel to talk about these things. We've brought people from the counseling center to talk about these things. We've brought people from the school. Oh, maybe this is another one, but like various places on campus where you have the expertise to come in and talk to you about those particular challenges that you're facing around emotional and affective labor, dealing with difficult, having difficult discussions, managing stress, all of those kinds of things. Don't wait for the staff to come and ask you for it, right? Proactively offer it, seek it out, find it, ask them, and really create the spaces and set the tone. Because if you want them to take work-life balance seriously, then you have to take it seriously yourself. Unfortunately, right?
No, I think that's all great information, because I don't know if, the nature of a significant amount of the personnel within our communications units or other aspects is we're in that service industry. We are service facing of faculty or county extension agents or other extension staff and technicians, et cetera. So I would be willing to wager that if we were to pass out this sheet to everybody in our association, a resounding 9 out of 10 would raise their hands in recognition that, oh, that is me. That, like you said, that explains what I feel and what I go through, even in a pre-COVID, pre-pandemic type of work environment. That yes, that stress of I've got to maintain my composure when I get the crazy request, the short timeline, the
Yep.
whatever. Yes.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yep. And that's exactly it, right? Like this is why I try to be as inclusive as possible when I talk about staff in higher education, because every single one of us is doing that work in some way, shape, or form, where something has been asked of us and there's that pressure to do the thing while still maintaining your composure. And it goes beyond just professionalism too, because in a lot of cases in higher education, because of the hierarchical structure, we're not necessarily treated professionally, right? Where that's the tension, right? We have to be professionals in circumstances where very often we're not treated professionally or as the professionals that we are, right? And so like that becomes extraordinarily challenging and exhausting, right? And taxing. So there, like I said, there's levels to it. There's different forms of it. In that sort of case, like masking is one of those ones, but there's different other actually communications. I have an essay, I could find it. But like they break down the different forms of emotional regulation that employees typically have to practice, right? And then masking is one of them, but there's other ones as well that sort of break down in more detail the different levels of emotional labor that they have to, sort of perform in a day. Now I really want to find it. So ask another question and I'm going to find my tab.
Well, I can ask you about career paths. You talk about career paths quite a lot in salary compression, which I think tends to sneak up on some of us employees that tend to be around for a long time. So can you explain salary compression and what can be done to alleviate it?
Yeah. Pay us more. It's like, I mean, it's a problem in higher education where the hierarchical structure is built for academics, right? You go, you get hired as an assistant, you get promoted to associate, you get to be full professor. Now, faculty will say that doesn't actually mean that much of a salary bump. Fair, fine. But then once you're tenured, you have all of these other options that are available to you. You can go on to be chair, you can go on to be a dean, a vice dean, go work in the provost's office, there's lots of various opportunities to maintain your work as an educator, as a researcher, but also move into administrative roles and ascend in that way if that's something you want to do. If you don't, there is always that possibility of your own research and teaching evolving as you go, right? You can always, start a new research project where you can, grow that sort of thing. So there's all these different ways that you can grow your career, right? When you're staff, the analogy I give is that each service center on campus has one director. Maybe one or two assistant associate directors, and then everyone else is at the same level. And what ends up happening though is that particularly in the economics of higher education as it's been for the past 20 years and longer, is that like you're not getting a pay raise every year, right? You're not getting a merit bonus or anything like that. And so you have been working for 20 years in basically the same position, right? Give or take, right? Probably your responsibilities probably have expanded, but your job role hasn't changed. And so there's no mechanism for changing it. And nobody wants to give people more money, and it's more trouble than it's worth to go to HR and try and reclassify someone's job, right? And so the new person, given that it's been 20 years, well, inflation is what it is, that new person coming in, well, they're going to have to pay you probably more than they're going to have to pay the new person as much, if not more than what you're making, in order for them to even consider taking the job. Right. Or, they're only making very little, much less than you are. Right. Or even the same thing, despite having 20 years experience, because you didn't get an assistant or a director position. Why? Because your assistant director and director never left. Right. Like it's, and that's really discouraging, because, the advice is that if you want to move up in higher education on the staff side, you have to move institutions, right? Which is a huge, huge detriment, and hugely challenging for women and minorities, right? Who disproportionately are placed bound due to family constraints, right? And so that means that particularly women and women of color, and other visible minorities will work at a job for 20 some odd years and see huge problems and never really get a raise beyond like, everybody got 2%, hooray. And then have the new people come in, and make more money than they do, simply because that's the market, but nobody's going to adjust the salary. And it's an equity issue. It's an equity issue, but nobody has that. There isn't good data on it. That's the problem, right? There's not good data. We have really good data on administrative salaries. We have really good data on faculty salaries. We have no data, almost no data on staff salaries. Part of the problem with that is that's because staff is such a all-encompassing and weird and various types of positions, right? We think faculty is we're comparing apples to apples with faculty. We're comparing apples to apples with, or oranges to oranges with administrators. A provost is a provost is a provost. A president is a president is a president, right? Size of institution matters, procedure of institution matters. But at the end of the day, when we say presidents, we all know what we're talking about. When we say associate professor, we all know what we're talking about. When we say director, well, what are we talking about? When we say learning design specialist, what are you talking about? Right? So all of these different kinds, and again, how student facing is it? How academically focused is it? What, sometimes you need a PhD or at least a terminal degree to work in a staff role. Sometimes you only need a BA. Sometimes, it's, you need a certain number of experience. Sometimes it's not. And so again, you have all of these variables that make it really difficult, to track, because I'm a learning design specialist at another institution. It's called a faculty developer. At another institution, it's a academic technology specialist, where I've had 4 different titles and have done basically the same job at different institutions. Right. So how do I compare those things? Right? How do you do that? And so that becomes one of the challenging issues, is that we just don't have a common language and a common sort of schema, the way the other side of the university house has, which is very clearly delineated and defined, right? Everyone knows what an assistant professor is. Everyone knows what an associate professor is. Everyone knows what the provost is. And we get that, right? Once we move over to our side, everyone's like, I don't know what you do, and where that fits and how important that is. Like, what do you, until you get VP in your name, nobody knows, right? And even then, sometimes you get VP in your name and people still don't know. So how do you compensate that? How do you compare? How do you even start to have conversations, right? And then you bring in the exempt, non-exempt factor, right? What makes one job exempt and one job not exempt? You know, and you know, the depending if you're a public or a private institution, right? Public institutions, depending on what your state it is, it's defined by the state, right? The state decides all of that, right? You don't have any choice in the matter, and there's very little you can do, because it's not like you're going to lobby your government to change your, like, you know, that is the least thing that they are worried about, is like who's exempt and non-exempt in higher education, unfortunately, right? Is it unionized or not? Right? That's another thing. Is it a right to work state, or is it a state that has really good unionizations? Which also doesn't always, you know, lead to good situations either, right? So there's a lot of things that make it a really hard question, or a really hard thing to solve. But I mean, I'm looking forward to the institution that does. I'm looking forward to the institution that takes it upon themselves to really take a hard look at their staff salaries, and staff job descriptions, um, and and um, and demographics, and, you know, look at it and bravely say, we have an equity issue with staff salaries on our campus, and here's how we're going to fix it. Right? And it's probably going to be a small liberal arts college, to be perfectly honest, because they're private and it's smaller and there's less staff to worry about. Um, but you know, I hope maybe a community college does it. Maybe, like, that seems like a place where that could happen, really not easily, but like cool places where that would happen. You know, that's my hope. And this goes back to your question of what you can do. Advocate for transparency, right? Advocate for transparency. In terms of salary levels, right? Nothing drives me more crazy when I'm looking at jobs and they're like, here's the salary, you're at an H5 band. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, what, how do you, you know, so, you know, even just like, where's the documentation that tells me what these different roles are and how they've been decided, right? You know, locked up in the you know, HR vault somewhere, but like, you know, can we have a conversation around these things? Are these still accurate? Like, what can we do within the system? And again, maybe you can't change them. I worked at public institutions of Virginia, and on the staff side, there was very little we could do because it was all dictated by the state, right? But within the confines of what has been legislated, what can we do? How can we make this better? How can we start to address some of these issues? Do we need to do a reclassification of people's jobs? Like, look at everybody who's been here for at least 5 years and look at their positions now and work to reclassify them, right? It's a huge undertaking. It's a lot of money. It's probably not going to happen after COVID finances, but maybe when things settle down, like, it's a good time to have that conversation. And you know, lay the groundwork now, and then to be able to come out of this on the other side and say, okay, well, if we really want to create an equitable, inclusive environment for faculty, students, and staff, where we're all working together to support students in their learning, this is an important step. This is something that should happen, that has to happen, because we now know and understand just how important staff are to the success and well-being of our students.
Wonderful. Was there any questions with our group? We're at 3 o'clock, so I want to be mindful of your time.
I
go
took
ahead.
care of the ones that I saw, so.
So I know you're on Twitter because I follow you, but you also have a blog. Would you mind, do you have anything to plug, as they would say in the podcast?
I just started a sewing blog because I don't do enough already that I need to, like, write about sewing. It's called Comedy of Errors because I make a lot of mistakes because I'm really new to sewing, and I also am not detail oriented, which is something you need to be when you sew. Trying. I have an ongoing series at the Chronicle of Higher Education on staff issues. I have one that is with the editor right now on microaggressions. And the particular forms of microaggressions staff face. And we talked a little bit about them actually today. that sort of condescension, that dismissal of our expertise, not treating us as professionals, those kinds of things. So I have that one hopefully coming out within the next few weeks. That's a big one. I also it just hit today. I just got the email while I was in this meeting, talking about by a colleague of mine and I writing about affective labor. So a lot of stuff I just talked about in the journal of, I can actually send it. I'm gonna get there it is. So yeah, let me just click it. There we go. Copy link location. So I have a piece in there with my colleague on, again, everything that I just talked about, which is affective labor and faculty development. And you may even read some of the things you heard me say today, because revising the draft so many times, it's very well polished now. But yeah, those are the things. I just, I want people to write more and talk more about staff issues locally. I'm glad you have this group, because it's people all over higher education are experiencing this, and nobody talks about it, or hasn't talked about it, or don't talk about it publicly. It's sort of one of those closed door conversations. We need to have these conversations out in the open, and start working together across units on campus to try and advocate for change. Because what benefits us benefits all the staff, and very directly often our students.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Oh, my
Again, we'll
pleasure.
share this with our members, and we do have an internal forum that I will post this, as well as post the article. So
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is, I don't love that it exists, but I love being able to come and talk to people about it, and extend that conversation and hear about other staff's experience. Because I think that that's really important for all of us to learn more about what our colleagues on campus are experiencing.
yeah, yes, and that's why I'm glad that you agreed to speak, because it is things that we probably should be talking about more as a group. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure too. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, you too.
Thank